Welcome to our meeting, our forum. We have a really exciting meeting ahead. I'm not going to take much time because we want to have as much time available to our three wonderful speakers. And so I'm just going to do a few introductions. First of all, my name is Paul Suravel. I'm the chairperson of South Mountain Peace Action, which is the sponsor of this meeting. Thank you. We first conceived of this event back in December, and the idea then was that we really had an opportunity to do something about the Israeli-Palestinian issue, in particular, not only because it's an important issue, but because the Obama administration had a clear policy for making headway, making progress on that problem. And so we began to think about the meeting, and we defined it as Israeli-Palestinian peace and subtitled the Obama-Clinton Program for a Two-State Solution and how we can support it. And I think it's been pretty clear in the last 2 or 3 weeks that there is, in fact, a very definite program that the president and his administration are working on and pushing forward, and that it's having a major impact on the state of negotiations and the prospects for peace. So we're very gratified to see not only that our work is making some difference locally, but that the issue is really being promoted on a national and international level in a very positive fashion. We phrased and framed the meeting in terms of how we can support the Obama-Clinton Program for a Two-State Solution. And Chris Black, one of our members, who actually wrote a wonderful piece that's in today's New York Times local about this meeting in the background. Chris is just going to come up and make a few suggestions about what we can do to follow up this meeting.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and especially our speakers for taking the time to come out with us tonight. I don't want to take up any time, but I do want to remind everybody that's here that the meeting, we're going to learn a lot, but really what's important is what we do after tonight. And so I have prepared a little list of some things that can be done for advocacy, which whatever you take away from this meeting, pass it along, and so that we can move the process forward. That's the purpose of having this meeting, this purpose of all these meetings that we have. So I'm going to pass these out now, and there's a place where you can write some notes down. If you get some ideas during the course of the program for advocacy, write them down, take them home, and then move forward from there. Okay, thanks.
So here's the order of business. We're going to start off with Ori Nir. Ori Nir is sitting on the far right. Ori is the national spokesperson for Americans for Peace Now, which is the sister organization of the Peace Now peace movement in Israel. Ori is a former journalist. He worked for Haaretz for many years. I believe he worked on the West Bank for a good part of that time. Hussein Ibish is the senior fellow at the American Task Force on Palestine. Hussein was previously communications director for the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, which is the largest Arab American organization in the country. Hussein actually has an op-ed piece in today's Guardian, and you can find it on the internet. It's a wonderful assessment of where the negotiations and the peace process has reached at this time. And last, we have Debbie Schlossberg, who is the Central New Jersey representative of the J Street organization. It's part of the J Street is now in the process of organizing on a local basis and setting up local chapters all over the country, and she's representing Central Jersey. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ori Nir.
Thank you very much. I want to cover a lot of ground, so I'll try to speed things up a little bit. Before I do, though, I wanted to thank the organizers, Paul, Debbie, And I wanted to thank you all for coming here. It's really, it is really exciting to see so many people here. I also wanted to recognize Hussein not only because he's a friend, but also because our two organizations have been cooperating in Washington and beyond in recent years, and really showing that Israeli-Palestinian cooperation, Israeli-Palestinian common ground is possible. We've been doing that with various programs. One of the most exciting programs that we did was a joint internship program where interns worked both at APN and at ATFP at the same time, and did some interesting projects together. I can tell you a little more about that later. So I'm really honored to share the podium with Hussein. Today's a special day. It's a day of drama. It's a day of drama that can really give us hope, and I'll explain why. I wanted to start with the issues of the day because what we've had in the past 24 hours is something that may very well be a turning point in the efforts to achieve Israeli-Palestinian peace. What we've had quite clearly is is the United States, the American government, asserting itself in the peace process in a way that we haven't seen before, particularly with Israel. Yesterday, Prime Minister Netanyahu came to the White House. He had an hour-and-a-half meeting with President Obama, came out of the meeting, went back into another meeting for another 30 minutes with the president. And then today, the teams of the two leaders were trying to hammer out some kind of a joint statement. Having not listened to the news in the past couple of hours, I don't know what came out of it. But what is clear that did happen in the White House, if you follow Israeli press reports and so on, was that the United States, the American president, not the United States, the American president demanded from Israel, which is the main actor, the main player in the peace process, some answers, some commitments in the way it's going to pursue peace with the Palestinians. And it seems to me that the content of what I think was the content of those demands is something that has never been uttered before, at least not in such a way. And that gives us a great deal of hope that finally the United States is going to find its mojo, if you will, in the peace process and really assert itself in a way that would bring about some progress. I came back from a visit in Israel a week ago. It was our Americans for Peace Now's annual fact-finding trip. And it was tough. I have to say, before I start, and what I want to do today is actually point to the sources and the reasons for hope. But before I do that, to tip the hat, I have to say that the situation is not very promising. And when we talk to Palestinians and to Israelis, the general mood is pretty grim. And the situation on the ground is pretty grim. My eyes are open. I'm not Pollyannish about the situation. So before I tell you about why we may be optimistic to a certain extent, there are quite a few reasons to be pessimistic. Many people in Israel and in Palestine have given up on the peace process. The positions of the parties are very much apart. You have weak leaders. You have a public, both on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side, that has grown a great deal of scar tissue and has turned its back to a large extent to the idea of a peaceful relationship between Israelis and Palestinians. You have an Obama administration that has made quite a few mistakes in the past year. And you have a situation on the ground that is getting more and more severe in terms of settlement activity, in terms of violence, in terms of what is happening in Jerusalem, which we can talk a little bit more later. However, we also saw some things that gave us hope, and I wanted to focus on those tonight. One thing that I think is maybe the most important source for hope is that still today, among both Israelis and Palestinians, there's a solid majority for a two-state solution. The publics on both sides have not given up on that. There's a majority, if you look at the polls, it's pretty constant, somewhere between 65 and 75%. It's a solid majority. The downside of this is that the same proportion, about somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of both Israelis and Palestinians would tell you that they don't see the chances of a two-state solution being applied. They don't think it's viable in the foreseeable future. But still, they support it. They think it's the right way to go. Furthermore, there's a majority, both among Palestinians and Israelis, who support the general outlines of what most probably the solution will be when finally there is a two-state solution, which are, to the people who know them, the Clinton parameters. The overall understanding that the border between Israel and Palestine and the West Bank and Gaza would be somewhere along the lines of the 1967 borders with some land swaps, that the issue of the refugees will be resolved without a mass return of Palestinians into Israel proper, Jerusalem will be divided, and so on and so forth. When people, and we spoke with pollsters who participated in the really interesting exercise of trying to present to Israelis and Palestinians that kind of formula, the results were pretty good. There was a majority, not a very large majority, but still a majority for the formula that we all think will be the final outcome of negotiations. Another reason for hope is that in the Israeli public, the notion, the recognition that the status quo is untenable, as Secretary Clinton pointed out in her speech to AIPAC a couple of days ago, the notion that the status quo is untenable is beginning to gain momentum. More and more Israelis are being convinced that Israel cannot remain Jewish and democratic if it holds on to the West Bank long term. And this notion that there's a creeping process of Israel turning into what it doesn't want to be is something that more and more Israelis are realizing and recognizing. And a minority still, but a growing minority, I think, feel that there's an urgency to take action. There's another component which I pointed out earlier, which maybe is the most decisive one and the one that I draw the most hope from. And that is that the Obama administration, despite some of the mistakes that it made earlier, is devising a real strategy for the peace negotiations, is beginning to explore the levers that it has on both parties. By the way, not only on Israelis, but also on Palestinians and on the Arab governments, which are an essential part of this process, and beginning to understand how it can effectively use those levers. That's something that is extremely important. The resolve that we've heard from American leaders in the past few days, Secretary Clinton, Vice President Biden, and others, is very promising, I think, and again shows a good prospect for hope. Another thing that I think is important, which I wanted to point out, is the growing antipathy of most Israelis to the settlers, and as a result of that, to the whole settlement project, to the settlement enterprise. There are more and more Israelis. This is something, by the way, that is not new, but I think it's a growing sentiment among Israelis, that the settlers and the settlement enterprise is detrimental to Israel's future as a Jewish democracy. It's something that is beginning to gain more and more recognition among the Israeli public. There's another component, there's a phenomenon that I must point to, which I think really goes both ways. It's definitely, for the most part, negative, but I think that it also has a silver lining, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Most Israelis are pretty how would I put it? Most Israelis have ceased to really care about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It is something that they don't feel is really pertinent, relevant to their daily lives. I know that for many of you, maybe most of you, it sounds strange. How could it be? Here is the occupation that is burdening Israel. Here's the issue that Israelis have discussed over and over again for so many years, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Polls show that, by the way, that Israelis have, for the most part, ceased to care. Now, that is very negative. It's terrible, and particularly for a sister organization in Israel, for Peace Now, it's a huge challenge to try to shake people up from that apathy and to get them involved. But there's also some sort of a silver lining to that. And if you like, later I can talk about what I see as the reasons for that, why I think Israelis have become so apathetic to this issue. The silver lining, however, is that because Israelis don't care that much about this issue, because it's become a lower priority issue on people's minds, it would be easier, I think, to turn Israelis on a dime once there's a real credible peace process going, and once there's real initiative coming from an Israeli leader who's seen as credible. And I have to say, the current prime minister, whose popularity ratings have gone down in recent months, still is pretty popular. If Prime Minister Netanyahu somehow finds it within him and somehow finds the right coalition to harness to this kind of process and really decides to go hand in hand with the US administration and launch a real credible peace initiative, the Israeli public will follow. They really will follow. So that's something that I think also gives me some hope. One last thing that I know Hussein will elaborate on, but I do feel that I would like to mention, is what is happening in the West Bank in recent months, or in recent years, under the leadership of Mahmoud Abbas and Prime Minister Salam Fayyad, two Palestinian leaders who are the real thing. They are the real partners for peace for Israel, and Israel has a chance there to participate, to cooperate with them, and to actually push things forward. Prime Minister Fayyad has been doing incredible things in the fields of economy and security, and Hussein will talk about it later, so I will not elaborate on that. The key to introducing change to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not so much the dynamic between Israelis and Palestinians, really, but the dynamic between an American leadership and an Israeli leadership. This is where the power is. This is where the levers are. This is where the initiative will come from. And since you're talking about two democratic countries, the United States and Israel, the pressure, the political pressure that comes from within, within the public, is of incredible importance. And what I'd like to talk about in the time that I have left is what the public, both here and in Israel, the public who cares, people like you, do and can do more of in order to try to bring about a peaceful resolution. As I said, in Israel, the main challenge of the peace movement is to try to shake people out of their apathy, and to convince them in two things, I think, mainly. One is that a peaceful resolution along the lines of the two-state solution is possible, and the second is to convince them that such a resolution is needed urgently, and that it's vital to Israel's future, that without such a resolution, Israel really doesn't have a future. As I said before, most Israelis support that notion, but they don't think that it's viable in the foreseeable future because of various reasons that I won't go into now. And that is a kind of a public mood that really serves the current government, the Netanyahu government, which I think has not yet decided, has not yet decided to take the right step toward peace. I have some polling data that I can share with you later to show how how this plays out. But I'll skip that in the benefit of time and other comments that I wanted to make. One thing that we don't have in Israel at the moment is a viable parliamentary opposition. The right is in power. The right controls the parliament, controls the Knesset, and when you look left of center, what you find is a party, the Kadima party, which is some kind of a ragtag party that does not speak in one clear voice that supports an aggressive, assertive peace process. Left of Kadima, it's tough. It's really tough. Meretz, if you're familiar, has shrunken into a three-member party. And even there you find it is very difficult to find people who are really committed to this issue and are willing to stir up opposition in an effective manner. What happens, therefore, because there's no viable parliamentary opposition, is that nonpartisan, extra-parliamentary organizations are filling the void. And Peace Now has been, I think, leading the effort in doing that, at least on the Zionist side, of the political spectrum. It is the chief peace movement in Israel, and it's definitely the authority, bar none, in the world in terms of following the issue of settlements, and I can tell you more about it. APN, Americans for Peace Now, which is the sister organization of Peace Now here in the United States, tries to influence the US scene. We're trying to both have impact within the pro-Israel community in the United States, and at the same time to try to make it clear to the political establishment in the United States, in Washington, that most of Israel's supporters in the United States do actually support security through peace for Israel, or peace through security, and a pragmatic solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Really quickly, to tell you a little bit about Americans for Peace Now and what we do. We work in three main realms. One is the political scene in Washington. We have the best leading analyst, lobbyist in Washington in this arena of Israeli-Arab relations. Her name is Lara Friedman. You can read her stuff on our website, peacenow.org. She has a really interesting, unique, no one does it but her, report on what is happening on Capitol Hill every week in terms of Israel-Palestine, Israeli-Arab issues, and U.S. policy in the Middle East. She has reports on settlements, and then she has a lot of interesting analysis on our blog, which, again, you can find on our website. Another scene, another realm in which we work is political activism on the grassroots level. Now, we're not chapter-based. Unlike J Street, which now has chapters across the United States, APN is not a chapter-based organization, but we do have a lot of supporters, and our main way of communicating with them is electronically through internet-based action alerts and things like that. I would urge you to join our list. And the third realm in which we're active is the media, which is what I do for APN. One very important scene or realm in which we work is the organized Jewish community in the United States. We are a member of the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations, the Conference of Presidents as it's known. We're active there. We're pretty lonely as as a kind of a lefty organization, a pro-peace organization that tries to voice and influence within the Conference of Presidents, and I think we're having some impact, trying to impact from within. The last thing that I want to say, which I was requested to touch upon, and I'll do it really quickly, is what people can do. What can you do in order to really support this administration as it goes into a really, really difficult phase of trying to twist arms, rather. And there's a multitude of things that people can do. Getting involved through organizations such as Hussein's or mine or Debbie's is something that is really important and and has a great deal of impact. If you send letters to your representatives through us, that has an impact. If you write letters to the editor that would not be through us, you would not want to associate yourself with a particular organization, but do that as a private citizen, that has a great deal of impact. Any kind of action alert that we sponsor or that we call you for has an impact, and we see it. We actually hear from it. We actually hear about it from people in Congress that we're in touch with. So any kind of such thing that you could do would have a great deal of impact, and I think this administration needs all the help that it can get in order to really assert itself now in what may be the decisive push for effective negotiations toward peace. I'll end here, and I'd be very happy to answer your questions later on. Thank you.
Just a program note. After the speakers have completed their presentations, we are going to open up the floor. I hope we can fit everybody in. We will allow each person 1 minute, either to make a comment or to ask a question, and you'll be able to address your questions to the speakers, or if you don't have a question and you just want to make a statement, that's fine as well. Hussein Ibish.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks very much. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank all the organizers, everyone who helped to put this together. A word of background first about the American Task Force on Palestine. ATFP was founded in 2003 in order to be a Palestinian-American non-partisan organization dedicated to a very simple proposition, and our mission can be summed up in a single statement, which is the goal of ATFP is to advocate that a negotiated end-of-conflict agreement that allows two states, Israel and Palestine, to live side by side in peace and security is in the American national interest. In other words, that's our point, is that this is in the American national interest. Now, I'd like to, like Ori, I'd like to talk a little bit about the present crisis. I think he described it rather well. It is really a historic thing for an Israeli prime minister to come to the White House, meet with the president, retreat to a private meeting with his own advisors, request an additional meeting with the president, and have both sides say to the press and the world, nothing. I mean, nothing. Yeah, there's no photo op, no joint statement, no press conference. No, I think they said it was the only statement that I saw until we got on the train together, which was in the early afternoon. It was a good atmosphere. Well, I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was a fine atmosphere. Who said what to whom about what? Well, I mean, this is extraordinary. And today, Prime Minister Netanyahu actually canceled all of his public events in order to try to deal with this situation because it's so pressing and so unusual. Now, I also agree with Ori that it's a great opportunity for the Obama administration, for the Palestinians, for everyone who's interested in pushing the ball forward on peace, and if he wants to go in that direction, for Prime Minister Netanyahu as well. I want to just look back a little bit and see how did we get here? What happened? Yes, President Obama, during the campaign, was very clear that he was going to prioritize this issue, and he said he wouldn't wait until the end of his second term or the end of his first term, an implicit criticism of George W. Bush's belated effort, half-heartedly, mainly through Condoleezza Rice, for about a year that didn't really get anywhere, and also of President Clinton's last year of his eighth year effort as well. And so it's really interesting how quickly President Obama got into it. He was inaugurated, and he went to the White House, and he got to the Oval Office. And after 10 minutes, he picked up the phone and made his first phone call, and he called Ramallah. And he talked to Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president. That's pretty extraordinary. On the second day in office, he appointed George Mitchell to be the special envoy for peace. So in other words, he lived up to his word on it. He didn't waste any time. He got stuck in right away. Now, during the year that's intervened slightly more, there's been a pretty extraordinary series of false starts and setbacks and what have you. But what's really interesting is that the Obama administration, Secretary Clinton and Special Envoy Mitchell and others, haven't given up on the issue. They haven't thrown up their hands and walked away. And what I'd like to suggest is that this is a logical consequence of the idea that President Obama was expressing during the campaign, that you can't wait for your last year because it's not going to take a year or 2 or 3. You need all 4 to 8 years to try to get there. So it's not, given his own set of expectations implicitly in that idea that you start on day 1 in your first 10 minutes with your first phone call in order to hope to get somewhere on this, is, I think, an idea that they might be disappointed that they haven't gotten further, but I'm sure they can't be surprised, given that, sort of agenda. Now, the idea the Obama administration first had was that there could be reciprocal gestures, right? The roadmap was set up for a first phase that would include a trade-off of Palestinian action on security and Israeli action on settlements. And by all accounts, including Israeli accounts, the PA and its new security services have been doing a great deal to enhance security in the West Bank, and I'll talk about that a little more. So on that side of the ledger, there's quite a lot to point to. On the Israeli side of the ledger, there wasn't much to point to because settlement building was going on apace. So the Obama administration asked the Israelis for a complete settlement freeze, and they made a big deal about it in the summer and the early fall. And they asked the Palestinians to crack down on incitement, which is a bit of a throwaway because they kind of are, and they could do more, but it's not their central mandate. Their central mandate is security, and they're kind of doing that. What they added to the list, which was really an interesting idea, was to bring the Arab states in. The Arab states should begin to operationalize the Arab Peace Initiative and at least sort of start to restore some of the diplomatic links that some Arab states had with Israel, sub-diplomatic relations, trade missions, and special representative offices and what have you, in some of the Gulf countries and some other places. This really didn't go very far because I think what the Obama administration failed to understand and appreciate fully were the domestic political dynamics in Israel, among the Palestinians, and in some Arab states like Saudi Arabia. So none of the parties felt that they could fully accommodate what the Obama administration was asking them for. And this was most dramatically, obviously, expressed in the question of the settlement freeze. Right? The Obama administration asked for a complete settlement freeze. It's there in the roadmap. Israel accepts the roadmap, but what about the settlement freeze? I mean, it's a conundrum. I think what the Obama administration didn't appreciate here was that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not operating on his own. He's in a crazy coalition with some very right-wing organizations that have a very hard time with the idea of a settlement freeze. And even within the rubric of what he ultimately came up with, a partial limited moratorium that doesn't include dozens of things, including Jerusalem, among many others, even within that rubric, the settlement movement and the bureaucracy are not really sticking to it. So he's, I think, a little bit hemmed in by his own political considerations. There is, I think, a legitimate concern that if he were to have accepted a complete settlement freeze, his coalition wouldn't have survived. And you can't really ask a politician to kind of give up power like that for an abstract principle. Having discovered this, though, the administration had created a terrible problem on the Palestinian side, because they had made a big deal publicly about the need for a complete and total settlement freeze. It's much easier for the United States to back away from that and say, well, we didn't get it, but we'll move on. Than for the Palestinians. The Palestinians really can't be less concerned about Israeli settlements than the Americans are. And this is exactly the problem, the conundrum that President Abbas was put in. He was led out to this position about full settlement freezes is necessary from Israel, and then left there. And what happened was that the Obama administration, well, President Obama himself, at the UN in October, met with both Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Abbas, and said, well, all right, we're not satisfied with what the Israelis have said on settlements, this partial temporary moratorium thing. It's not okay, and we keep the issue in the air. We didn't really give the Israelis a lot of credit for that, and they continue to insist that settlement building was illegitimate, but he said, we're going to prioritize something else. Now we're going to prioritize getting back into talks, and that's going to be the priority. Well, I think at that point, what became obvious was that Prime Minister Netanyahu had managed to triangulate very deftly between his right-wing coalition partners on the one hand and American expectations on the other hand by giving just enough to get Congress especially, and also the White House, to see him as the one who was coming forward and making concessions by his Bar Ilan speech, in which he gave a very tepid and attenuated endorsement of a two-state idea. It really wasn't that convincing. And by the temporary partial moratorium freeze that looks more and more iffy with every passing day. But that was just barely enough to get him out of the weeds with Congress and the White House, especially with Congress, and to put the onus on the Palestinians to come back to negotiations. But for the Palestinians, there were a series of body blows to their political standing that made it extremely hard for the leadership to justify going back into negotiations. First of all, there was a settlement freeze issue. They had told everyone had said, well, we're going to have a settlement. There wasn't one, and they're supposed to say, okay, there wasn't one, but we go back. It doesn't play very well domestically, even though returning to negotiations is very important from the Palestinian national interest. The second thing was the fiasco over the Goldstone report. If you want to talk more about that during the Q&A, I'd be happy to tell you. But let's put it this way. Simply put, the Palestinians were always going to pay a price about the Goldstone report. It was either going to be an international price diplomatically or a political price domestically, whatever they did. And they mishandled it so badly they paid retail on both prices, and it was pretty grim. So they ended up with, and also, by the way, Secretary Clinton, when she visited Israel in the fall, in November, made a very unfortunate statement that seemed to imply a much greater degree of Obama administration satisfaction with Netanyahu's positions than existed, but she took it back, but the damage was done. The Palestinians found themselves in a situation in which it was very much in their interest to go back to talks. And they were being demanded by everybody to go back into talks, including the Europeans, and they felt incredibly pressured to do it. But they felt also politically constrained, in the same way that Netanyahu felt politically constrained, I think, about a complete settlement freeze. In other words, can you sell this to people under these circumstances? So for months, they were kind of begging the Americans and the Israelis, give us something, anything, even something symbolic that we can show to people as a rationalization for getting back into talks. They didn't get much. What ended up happening was the idea of proximity talks, which is really a throwback, most unfortunate throwback to the 80s, where people don't sit in the same room. It's almost childish, right? You're running from one hotel room to the other. It's silly, but it attenuates it appeals to the Palestinians at this point because it makes the cost much less. You don't have photo ops, and you can say you haven't actually met the other side. So it just makes it more palatable. The other thing that they did, which is an even worse throwback to not only the 80s but the 70s and beyond, was they asked the Arab League for permission, and they got it as a political cover. But that really is hearkening back to the very, very bad old days when Palestinian decision-making was kind of subordinate to Arab decision-making, a disastrous situation that took decades to correct. But that was sufficient, I think, to lead up to a situation where they were very, very reluctant to go back into proximity talks. But they were willing to do it under these circumstances, but really, really concerned about a key problem, which is that once the talks became the main issue in the fall. The question then became, talks about what? Right? Not just what kind of talks, okay, proximity talks, but what are you talking about? I mean, that's always a crucial issue. Do we have clear terms of reference? Do we have a clear agenda? Do we have, is it just talking about the weather or whatever we feel like talking about? Or do we have a list of topics that are prioritized and structured? The Israeli position was keep it vague, right? And the reason for this, I think, is that Prime Minister Netanyahu is extremely concerned about getting into negotiations with Palestinians on the question of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a bigger tripwire for him than settlements were with his coalition partners. And the even greater danger is that there is this rather gigantic gap between the present Israeli government's perception of the role of Jerusalem, not only in peace but in negotiations, and that of the Obama administration, whose view is much closer to the Palestinian view that this is a core permanent status issue that needs to be discussed right away, and that I think clearly Israel is going to have to make some serious compromises on Jerusalem in the same way that Palestinians have to make some serious compromises on refugees and return and whatnot. I mean, there are some politically painful things that are going to have to happen here. This is really what sets the stage, I think, for the crisis that emerged with the Biden visit and with the one that's going on today, which is that when Vice President Biden arrived in Israel, and whoever it was who decided to announce the 1,600 new settlement units in Ramat Shlomo made that decision, it was a crisis that was waiting to happen because of this huge division of opinion between the Israeli government and the United States over settlements. And the United States, interestingly and importantly, didn't back down. And people look at the situation and kind of, for a while there, they were saying, well, Netanyahu has defied the United States successfully, and therefore he has won. Well, no. I mean, I think not at all. And the level of outrage coming out of the White House and people around the White House was palpable. And it's pretty clear that the Israelis had to engage in a climb down before the White House agreed that Obama would meet Netanyahu at the White House. There was a series of conversations and apparently a written document that we haven't seen. But what we understand is in there is that the Israelis climbed down, but not on settlements, but rather on the real issue at hand, which is terms of reference for the proximity talks. And it would appear that Netanyahu has agreed that everything, including Jerusalem, will be included in the proximity talks. This is a huge win for the Obama administration, a huge win for the Palestinians, and it's in Israel's interests as well in the long run. It is very significant. Apparently there was also some kind of agreement to ease the blockade of Gaza, but it's not clear how. And something that is extremely murky about Israeli settlements in occupied East Jerusalem, the Arab parts at least of East Jerusalem, that has been described as don't ask, don't tell. Now, whether that means the Israelis go ahead and do it and they don't tell anybody, or whether it means they say they're going to do it but they don't do it, or whether it means they don't say they're going to do it and they don't do it, I think that remains to be seen. I think it's something in between all three, where they've told the administration they're not going to say it and they're not going to do it, and then they're going to try to do it a little bit. But, then they're going to get caught. At any rate, and the political cost for this stuff has gone up. The spotlight is on, and Israeli settlement activity in occupied East Jerusalem is not just a Palestinian problem. Now it's a White House problem, right? It's taken on this level of significance. Now the crisis is really grave because, having received these assurances, George Mitchell invited Prime Minister Netanyahu, who was coming here for the AIPAC conference, to meet with the president in the White House. And just before he was going to show up, somebody, who knows who in Israel, perhaps the same person or group of people, perhaps it's that Jerusalem Planning Committee, at any rate, depends on who you believe, announced that there would be 20 new housing units somewhere else in an Arab neighborhood in East Jerusalem. Well, this, I think, is the proximate cause of this running in and out of the White House and canceling all your visits, and really what is turning into a very, very serious problem between Israel and the United States. Now, I think it's very important to notice that, actually I'm wrong. It's not between Israel and the United States at all. Right? It's not that at all. It's not a strategic problem between countries. The US-Israel relationship between countries strategically is very solid, especially on military cooperation, Israel's security, things like that. That's really not going to be affected by these kind of political disputes. But what we do have is a political crisis between governments, between Obama and his allies and Netanyahu and his allies. And it's a major crisis. And while I think there isn't going to be a long-term cost to Israel, I think there might well be a big long-term problem for Netanyahu rather, because there is a crisis of trust here between politicians. So just to make it clear at what level it operates. Now, I think because of that, once again, this will be healed. Because it's again going to be, as it was a few days ago, it's again going to be in both sides' political interests to ratchet down the tensions and restore general good humor and whatnot. The goal of the administration is not focused on settlements, as I say, it's focused on the talks, right? And so I think it's going to be just ever harder for Netanyahu and his friends to get out of the proximity talks on terms that Americans and Palestinians would want, that is, say, with all the core issues on the table after this. So I'm pretty sure, and since, by the way, Palestinians were willing to go back to proximity talks under much less advantageous conditions, I'm quite sure after a lot of kicking and screaming and stuff for the public, they will go back, and they should, especially because it would be not to return to proximity talks or any negotiations would be the clearest way to squander these gains and not take advantage of this opportunity to redirect attention on the other party's problems and flaws and to get closer to the United States, both of which are important things. Now, I want to say, I'm not optimistic in the immediate term about what can come out of the proximity talks. But I think it's very important to keep the diplomatic ball in the air. We can't have the diplomacy stall, okay, and just melt. We can't have a spectacular failure either. Last time we had a spectacular failure, we got an intifada that was perfectly disastrous. And we can't have that. At the same time, I don't see any elements, as Ori was saying. The leaders are weak, they're far apart, they don't agree on anything, and they don't really have mandates to agree on huge, and the reciprocal steps are not clear. So, I mean, they are clear, but it's clear they won't be doing. So I think for the foreseeable future, the talks about talks will go along. I think the best case scenario really is that for the next year or two, they go forward in a very gradual way, all right? And that would be a really bad thing if the diplomacy was the only source of momentum towards peace, but it's not. Because in August, the PA cabinet came up with the first really good idea on Middle East peace that anyone's had in at least 15 years, and probably more than that, which is the program of the 13th Palestinian government. It's also known as the State and Institution Building Plan. It's also called the Fayyad Plan, after the prime minister who orchestrated it. And it's basically the idea that Palestinians are unilaterally going to develop the institutions and the economic and institutional and infrastructural and most importantly administrative framework of their state under the occupation in order to end the occupation, without asking Israel's permission, with international support and international backing, and they're going to do it to prepare for independence. In other words, what Palestinians are doing is they're taking up the responsibilities of self-government while continuing to insist on the right of self-determination. And this is new. It's a paradigm shift for Palestinians, because in the past, the Palestinian national movement has always conceptualized the path to liberation as a diplomatic one. Well, until the mid-'80s, it was an armed struggle one. Then it became a diplomatic one where top-down, you have negotiations, you declare a state, they recognize your state, and then you have a state. Well, someone, that is, say, Prime Minister Fayyad and his cabinet colleagues, realized that, well, first of all, it doesn't work like that in practice for various reasons, largely because of the occupation. And also, if you got that state, it has to function. They have to have ministries and whatever. And it's perfectly easy for Palestinians to say, well, under occupation, we haven't been able to do this. But also, they haven't tried to do it. And now they are. So this plan calls everybody's bluff. It calls the Palestinian bluff and the Israeli bluff. Do you want to build a Palestinian state in the occupied territories? For Palestinians, it means you have to forget about everything else and channel your energies into constructively building the framework of your state rather than anything else. For Israelis, it means you have to allow the Palestinians to do this. You have to get out of their way, literally and figuratively. You have to let them breathe. You have to let them move around. You have to let them do it. You have to not prevent them from doing it. You don't have to give them money, right? You don't have to give them stuff or technical support. You do have to get out of the way. You have to coordinate with them on security and things like that in order to accomplish this. Now, in January, the PA, two PA ministries issued a budget attached to this plan. And it's extremely interesting. It's very detailed, and it shows a lot of interesting projects, but it also shows too many that are unfunded or underfunded or with funding pending. All right, and it's extremely important that this thing go forward. But a lot of stuff has happened, much more than most people realize. Last year, 1,000 community development programs were done. There is now a transparent and accountable public finance system for the PA ministries that has been rated very highly by Pricewaterhouse, which is a big change for the for the Palestinians. There's still problems with the office of the presidency with Fatah, with the political party, but the PA ministries are cleaning up rather nicely. There are a number of public-private initiatives, including the first planned city in the West Bank, another planned suburb. There's an investment fund that's been established for small and medium-sized businesses. And most importantly, the creation of something also new among Palestinians, which is a professional, streamlined security force that operates like a real police department and that enforces the law equally and dispassionately and provides real security to people. They've been deployed in Jenin and Nablus and other parts of so-called Area A in the West Bank, and they've restored law and order to otherwise lawless places. This has facilitated Israel's withdrawal of several key checkpoints. All of that restoration of law and order and renewed access and mobility because of the checkpoints has led to a major economic uptick. I won't call it a boom. I think that's, it's exaggeration. It's all at the retail level, and it's limited. But the quality of life, including economically, has improved a great deal in the West Bank as a consequence of this. And a lot of it has to do with security coordination with Israel and Palestinians taking up, as I said, the responsibilities of government. Now, what the Israelis ultimately are going to have to do, if this is going to succeed, and I do think at the moment it is by far the best hope for serious progress in the near term, is to cede more and more attributes of sovereignty in greater and greater parts of the occupied territories to the Palestinian Authority as this plan unfolds, because that's going to be necessary. Otherwise, it will really die on the vine. To me, it seems obvious that the present diplomatic situation it's not dead, it's not moribund, but it's not very promising. I mean, you can probably get talks going again, but I don't expect any major breakthrough at the moment. But I do see a great deal of potential momentum due to real, palpable, concrete achievements on the ground, improving of quality of life and building the framework of the state as another form of momentum in the same direction, and what we're looking for, and what the PA is looking for in the long run, so 3-4 years, something like this, is convergence. Right? This is the word. It's convergence. Convergence between a bottom-down diplomatic process that has to wake up at some point out of this stupor, and a bottom-up state and institution building approach that can come together to provide some real meaningful change. Think of this plan as the Palestinian answer to settlement building. Unilateral, concrete changes on the ground, with the exception that this actually promotes peace, and is actually consistent with international law, and it doesn't actually harm anybody else's human rights or basic national interests. So what I'm suggesting, in conclusion, is that really you need to support this. Okay, everybody needs to support this, because this is where the action is. All right, we're all fixated on Bush and Obama and Netanyahu and Abbas and Mitchell and Clinton, and yeah, very important. It's crucial, yeah? But there's nitty-gritty, non-sexy stuff like servers for health and sewage and road maintenance and highways. And yeah, it's not sexy. Yeah, it isn't. I agree. But you know what? That's how a state gets built. Yeah? That's how people govern themselves, right? And for the first time, there's a gang of Palestinians saying, not only are we're not asking permission, we're doing it. We want to do it. So, support overall for the concept of a two-state solution, crucial. But specific support for this, where I think in the next year or two, the main action is going to be on getting there, is crucial. We need rhetorical support. You've got to support it in writing. You've got to tell people about it. Not enough people know about this. Some people have started to to notice this. David Ignatius, Tom Friedman the other day wrote a very good piece about it. Some people are getting it. But a lot of people still either don't understand it, they've never heard of it, or they're way too skeptical about it. And they don't understand that a lot of stuff has already been done. So it's not theoretical, especially if you look at the security forces. I mean, if you can organize a group of people whose main task is arresting people and doing painful, difficult things that people don't like, I'm sure you can do it in other sectors as well, like health and education and sewage and clean drinking water and highways and whatnot. Yeah. So this, the idea that Palestinians can't do it is utterly disproven by the fact that where they started and the most success they've had is in the most difficult area imaginable, security, and that too security coordinated with Israel. Wow. It's incredibly difficult, also politically difficult, because it lets people call them, and they do, collaborators and traitors. Next, members of Congress, right? There's a lot of resistance to this in Congress. There's been some support. There's been a change of attitude in Congress. Last year, Congress gave $900 million to the PA, extraordinary. Not one single dissenting vote, not even Ilyana. Nobody voted against it. That's pretty extraordinary. However, that's not enough. We need technical support, and we need political protection for this from the United States. Other countries can pay. The Arabs should pay. Europeans should pay. Japanese should pay. We can do our bit, but American political support and backing, including in Congress, is really going to be necessary. Talk to your members. If you give money to them, they like you better, but talk to them. And I think some of the congressional people from New Jersey, they need a little work on this issue. They're not all where they need to be on this just at the moment. Finally, you can certainly volunteer with groups like APN, J Street. You can contact us if you like, AmericanTaskForce.org. We've got all the documents on this if you want. Again, that's AmericanTaskForce.org. And if you're in a position to, really the best thing you could do is to invest in the West Bank. We're talking about public-private partnerships. We're talking about businesses. We're talking about profit-making ventures. And most of us, I'm certainly not, we're not in a position to invest in major financial matters and major ventures, but some people are. And I think if you're interested in peace, and you have the means, and you want to do some good business, that's a damn good place to start. Thanks a lot.